I'm back with 5 more woodworking illusions that are guaranteed to blow your mind. Each one gets harder than the last, starting with a simple DIY project that requires basic tools and no workshop, and ending with one of the wildest, craziest, most complex things I've ever built that moves in a way that seems impossible. And the best part, you can win one of these projects for free. Stick around and I'll tell you how. We're starting with a head scratcher you've probably seen before, the impossible nail and wood illusion. So I'm making a version that's better. Behold, the impossible pencil in wood. Now, normally for the nail and wood trick, you would boil the wood, but there's a much better, much easier way where it doesn't involve making lumber soup. So I start with a nice straight grain board, and I decided to get extra fancy with a piece of wenge because I thought that would look really cool in contrast to a standard yellow number 2 pencil. You can just use pine, but whatever you use, just make sure it's a straight grain wood because straight grain makes the split easier, which makes the seam disappear later on.
Can't see the line, can you, Russ?
No.
The next thing I need to do is do all the layout. So this is 4 inches wide, so 2 inches for the center line. Give it a quick little punch-a-rooney. Another punch, and it's over to the drill press. Now you are going to need to cut a few larger holes in the wood to show off the pencil. Right here I'm using a 2 1/4 inch Forstner bit, and while I am using my drill press, you can use a hand drill, especially if you're just using pine, and you'll get just as good of results. All right, now comes the fun part, and the thing that really separates this from that impossible nail and a 2x4 that you've probably already seen 100 times. I'm going to clamp this to the bench, whack it with a hammer, and because we're going to break it along the grain, you'll never be able to tell that it was ever broken at all. I'm clamping it to the side of my workbench and paying attention to the alignment so it hopefully breaks right where it rests against that top edge of the workbench. Oh man, I think that was perfect. Look how close I got to the bullseye. All right, that was where I was aiming. It's a little off, but not too bad. So the goal was to make the break above the center point of where the pencil is going to be. So all the chiseling that I have to do to inlay the pencil only has to occur on one side. That right there is perfect. The next step, chiseling. Just kind of eyeball the halfway point, and then we can always come back and refine. So I'm saying about right there. All right, I went and grabbed my pencil with the white lead so you can actually see what I'm doing here. Make those marks a little bit more clear. Now I need to chisel out a divot for the pencil to rest in, and I need to remove enough material that it fits all the way down inside, and then there's room for the top to be glued back on without hitting the pencil. And you may have already realized, but this isn't the only way to do this. If I was to have the grain running perpendicular to the direction of the pencil, I could have just broken off the back piece and then used a drill to make the pencil whole. And if you're curious as to why I didn't use this much easier method, well, it's because I didn't think about it until after the fact. So this really simple project could actually be even easier. What, we start this like an hour ago? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp it up, and I'm going to take a roundover bit and hit the inside because we won't be able to do that once that pencil is inserted. We'll start over here. Just use my little fingies. I'm trying not to use too much glue because I don't want a ton of squeeze out, and I definitely don't want that pencil getting glued to the wood. It's also a good idea once you get it all clamped up to clean out as much of that glue squeeze out as you possibly can because you don't want to have to deal with scraping out dry glue in those really hard to reach places later on. All right, this looks really good, so I'm going to let it dry overnight, and then we'll come back tomorrow and finish it. All right, there it is. A pencil trapped inside a solid block of wood. Build difficulty, I'll give this a 1 out of 10, but illusion impact, I'm gonna give this a full 5 out of 10 because this is really a head scratcher of an illusion because you cannot see where the wood was broken, thus making people wonder how the heck you even got that pencil in there. This is just the warm up. Next, we're gonna step into the world of impossible geometry where if your angles are off just a little bit, the whole illusion falls apart. And real fast before we jump into the second project, I need to get started on that final illusion build because it is way more complicated and is going to take me over a week to build, about 2 weeks actually. So I have to work on it in the background while I'm building these other 4 projects. This project is what's called a Waterdrop kinetic sculpture or an automata. And the first step is cutting out all those rings over on the CNC. This next illusion is called the Penrose Triangle, and this one may make you question reality. When done right, this illusion looks completely impossible, but is really a simple DIY project that most folks could pull off themselves. I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 10 for difficulty. Now, you could make this from a 2x4, but I am gonna church it up with one of my favorite woods, and that's purple art. I got this from my local Rockler store. And first up, Jeff cut that board down and glued it up into sticks. These are 8 inches long and about 1.5 inches square. And I'm gonna throw a diagram up on the screen real fast with all the dimensions and the angles. And you can pause if you need to and take a screen grab if you wanna build a version for yourself. So the magic here is all about the angles. There are 4 pieces to the Penrose Triangle. All of them have alternating 45-degree miters. And for it to actually work, you also have to cut 45 degrees off long ways from those top 2 pieces so those don't get in the way of the illusion. It is a bit of an awkward glue up. I went ahead and added some pin nails to help hold everything together. Not really ideal, but these are so small, they're barely gonna be noticeable in the finished piece. All right, once it's glued up, now comes the fun part. Finding the perfect angle where the illusion actually works. And you know what? I'll have to walk you through cutting that top piece as I figure it out in real time because it only works when you're viewing it through the camera. The Penrose Triangle just seems like a really easy DIY project. But the last step, where you have to cut that angle to complete the illusion, is sneaky hard. You're gonna see it different because you're looking at it through the lens of my camera. So what I need to do is use my camera and look through the viewfinder and see it how my camera sees it, and then the illusion will work for you. Okay, here we go. Let's see if we can look at it through the viewfinder and find the illusion. If I come over here, maybe a little bit, whoa, nope, ooh, we're getting close. The illusion works when you rub your hand across this back and then you switch from the back around to the side, and it looks like that's in the same plane as the very top. So I'm actually gonna have to pull the card out of my camera, go look at it on my computer, and then come back and make sure that it's lined up. Little bit off, but it's really close. Take a piece of tape, and I'm going to kind of play around with that angle. It's really hard to keep it stationary. I moved it, and I'm guessing I'm gonna have to line it back up. How does that look? And once I've found that angle, I'm gonna cut that piece with a handsaw and just pray that I get this cut right. So, more like that. And real quick, I'm just gonna give it a quick sand and throw some finish on it, not because you necessarily need to, but because I am physically unable to consider a project done until there's some type of finish on it. And I'm using some Total Boat Wood Honey, which is kind of like my emotional support finish. All right, there it is, the Penrose Triangle, classic forced perspective illusion. One angle sells it, every other angle ruins it. Build difficulty, I'm going with a 3 out of 10, but illusion impact, I'm gonna go with a 9 out of 10, because when done right, this illusion is quite mind-bending and does not look real. But let's go ahead and move on to the next illusion, where it looks like a 3D cube is floating right off the wall. Building these woodworking illusions requires precision, craftsmanship, and getting those details just right. Which reminds me of my favorite footwear, Tecovas, the sponsor of this video. Now, this is way more than just a good-looking pair of boots. They're crafted in over 200 steps using premium leather, and they're comfortable from day one. No break-in period, no regrets, just that comfortable broken-in feel right out of the box. And I'm not the only Tecovas fan in the house. Katie's been rocking her Jessies, Chloe just picked up a pair of the Jolenes, and of course, I'm wearing the Dean. And it's officially a family affair, but this isn't about matching boots. It's about finding something that actually feels like you. Durable, well-made, timeless, and sharp enough to get noticed without saying a word. When I visited our local Tecovas store, it felt more like stepping into a clubhouse rather than a shop. They handed me a cold drink, gave my boots a free shine, and their staff actually knew how to get the perfect fit. Plus, you can even get your initials branded into the leather if you're feeling bold. So if you're someone who takes pride in how you show up, whether that's in your work, your style, or both, click that link down in the description or scan that QR code on the screen and check Tecovas out for yourself. Just be warned, once you get a pair, the family's probably next.
And real quick before we jump into project number 3, let's go back and check on the kinetic sculpture that I've been working on this whole time. I've got all those rings cut out, and now I've got to round each one of them over and then spin what feels like an eternity hand sanding each one until it's absolutely perfect. And I already made a mistake. So when I cut them on the CNC, I cut those holes all the way through instead of halfway like I was supposed to, and now I have to plug them up, and you're just gonna have to hang around to see if that worked. Let's go ahead and move on to project number 3.
Let's step it up a bit with this next illusion that tricks your eye with nothing but grain direction and contrasting wood species. It's a perfectly flat piece, but when you look at it, there appears to be a floating 3D cube, and that's what really sells that illusion. Now, this one does require a few more tools, and for that reason, I'm giving it a difficulty rating of 5 out of 10.
I'm gonna be using my laser cutter to cut all the pieces out of veneer. I'm using maple, oak, walnut, and cherry, and I got all of these from my local Rockler store here in Oklahoma City, and using veneers helps to keep this project really affordable, but you could also make a chunkier version out of solid wood that you cut out on a CNC or a laser, or you know what, if you hate free time, cut it all by hand, but that's gonna bump the difficulty level up to at least a 9 out of 10. This illusion works because of contrast. You have one light wood, one medium wood, one that's darker, and then the darkest is that walnut that's going to be the background, and then your brain sort of fills in the shadows and the highlights, and you've got instant 3D cube. Now, working with veneers is a bit of a challenge. They're so thin, so I'm going to start just by laying down some tape, sticky side up, and then placing all my pieces on top of that. And here's the big thing, grain direction. If your grain's all over the place, it's going to read from far away, but up close, it's gonna look all muddled and it's not gonna look right. So take your time here. I really did to make sure that every file in the laser had the exact right veneer orientation. And then I could go put the whole thing together. Now, I don't know how, but I actually got this whole mosaic put together with all the grain direction perfect, which is kind of unlike me. But I did have a couple small, almost invisible gaps, but you know what? I'm just gonna take that as a win. Now, pulling it off that board where it's taped down, that was terrifying. I mean, one wrong move and you could snap a veneer, and trust me, I came really close to doing that. Next up, I'm gonna glue this to a 1/2-inch plywood backer board. Now, normally you would want a vacuum bag of veneer glue up like this, but you know what? I just clamped another board on top and used some parallel clamps, and this works surprisingly well. Now, after unclamping, I did have one small spot that was peeling up that needed re-gluing, hence that kettlebell that you see on top while I'm sanding, and you know what? It ended up working out just fine. Now, to really finish this piece and make it look really nice, I'm gonna give it a walnut frame. And I'm gonna do this in a way that kind of, allows for a little variance if your angles aren't perfect. So once all 6 pieces were cut with those 30-degree angles, I'm gonna run a rabbet on the back of the frame. So it's gonna overhang the base of the mosaic by just a hair. And that's gonna save me from any issues if I don't have perfect alignment. Sort of like trimming out a door to hide the shims that you needed to get it straight. Now, I did use the old tape trick for glue up, and this worked well enough. I actually made this frame after a cutting board that I make in the next project, and as you'll see, I had a very good reason for spending a few hours dialing in my table saw and miter gauge, so these cuts were spot on, and that frame fit perfect. All right, after giving everything a sanding, I finished it with some more of that Total Boat Wood Honey, and I actually finished every single project in this video with Wood Honey because it really is my favorite quick finish. Now, you guys know that Total Boat has been a long-time sponsor, so if you want to pick up some of their great finishes and epoxy, just make sure to use that discount link down below, and you'll save some extra cash that way.
All right, there she is, the 3D Cube Wood Mosaic, and this might be the most impactful illusion of the 5. For build difficulty, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. For illusion impact, I'm going with a full 10 out of 10 because when you look at it, your brain adds the depth and that 3D effect. This piece might be my favorite, and I am a little bit sad to give it away, but you know what? You guys deserve this. I want to say thank you for watching and for subscribing. And if you're not subscribed already and you're enjoying this video, please consider doing so. Moving on to the craziest 3D pattern cutting board design that I've ever seen.
Before moving on, let's check back in on that kinetic sculpture where I'm cutting more parts over on the CNC. These parts are going to be the upper frame that holds all the rings and the cams, and even though I use my CNC for accuracy, I still managed to screw this up by programming the cut too short, meaning I have to glue on some of that length back. Luckily, I did save the board that it was cut from, so I can glue on another piece and even match the grain. Now, you've probably already seen some of those in-grain cutting boards with some really interesting 3D patterns, but I found a version that goes way beyond that. This is a geometric illusion with all sorts of depth, but it's also a lot more difficult than the first 3 projects. I'll give this one a 7.5 out of 10, maybe even more, because this one gave me all sorts of trouble, and I thought this was gonna be an easy project. Making a cutting board is sort of a rite of passage for a woodworker, but I haven't built one in probably 5 or 6 years. I did pick a more challenging design, but I think this is much more unique, much more better looking than a lot of the 3D cutting boards that I've seen out there, and I wanted to pick up some really nice lumber to go with that bold design. Not only is Rockler a great place to get all the tools and supplies that you need for all your projects, it's also a really good place to get some lumber. They have a whole bunch of different types of exotic woods and different species that maybe you won't find at your local hardwood dealer, and that's exactly what I'm looking for today. I'm gonna be using 4 different species of wood. These are wenge, maple, walnut, and purple heart. You guys know I love purple heart. Now, confession time, I had to build this cutting board twice. The first time around, I got all the way to the end, all the way to that very last glue up, and the pieces didn't line up, and this was 100% due to my complacency. I mean, it really had been years since I had even checked my table saw to see if my blade was in line to the table or if my fence was aligned, and I spent a couple hours dialing everything in, and none of those things were square. And if you build this cutting board, if your measurements are off by 1/2 degree, there's so many angle cuts in this piece, those are gonna compound, and it's just not gonna work. So it is really important, and maybe this is the reminder that you needed. It was definitely my reminder to just kind of slow down, and it reminds me of a saying that we learned when I was in police academy and we were at the pistol range, and I've said it before, but I'll say it again: smooth is fast. Now, the first time I said this, a lot of you rightly pointed out that the whole saying is slow is smooth and smooth is fast, but I kind of disagree with that. I don't think you have to be slow to work fast. I just think you have to be smooth and efficient and move with purpose. Now, I did slow down a little bit, and I tuned up every tool, and before every cut on this board, I double checked the blade angle. And like I said, even if you're off by 1/2 degree, that's gonna compound over those 6 glue ups, and you'll end up with something that looks like this. All right, hopping off my soapbox and getting back into the project, even though I'm building one right now, and I think this project is awesome, I kind of hate making cutting boards. Not because they're hard, but you know what? They're just not practical. I mean, no one in my home is gonna use a fancy $300 cutting board. I'd rather have those cheap bamboo ones you can buy from Target that I don't care if I destroy or cut up. And honestly, my wife is even worse about this than me. Years ago for Christmas, I made her this really beautiful, really fancy chef's knife, and she absolutely loved that as her Christmas gift. I think it's been at least 4 years since I made this for her. Guess how many times she's used it? Zero times. And we're the same way with fancy cutting boards. They're more decoration than functional kitchen equipment. But regardless of all the impractical yet beautiful cutting boards that I never actually cut on, this one is my favorite. I got this design from a YouTube channel called Caleb Fine Woodworking, and I actually bought his plans on Etsy, but I did do a couple things differently. This section right here is supposed to be cut off on the bandsaw, but honestly, it's just easier for me just to run it over my joiner until I've removed the right amount of material. And then that next step is a really tricky one where you have to make this 45-degree cut through a double glue up block. It's such a thick block that the saw blade can't reach all the way through, so then you have to go over to the bandsaw and finish that cut. Well, I don't trust my bandsaw not to drift into the face that I want to keep, so I took this cut insanely slow, but it turned out great. It did leave a little edge, and the easiest way to fix that is just a couple passes with a really sharp hand plane just to flush it back to that 45-degree surface. And right before the glue up, you cut each section into 4 pieces. On mine, these are all about 2 inches thick, and I got everything prepared for that final glue up. And that final glue up is super tricky. I mean, maybe one of the hardest glue ups that I've ever done. And if I had another crack at this, I think I would find a better way to do this. I mean, I thought everything was aligned. I even did a dry run trying to figure out what my clamping setup would be, but I still ended up with a little bit of misalignment, and it really, really bothers me. And especially after I built this cutting board twice and I had spent so much time getting all my tools dialed in, only to have the very last step get off because of clamping pressure. And if you have a better clamping solution for this final step, honestly, drop it in the comments because I would really love to hear it. All right, out of the clamps, I run this thing through the drum sander to get everything nice and flush. And then I had to do a marathon of sanding, one of the not fun things about making an end-grain cutting board. And I broke over the edges with a round over. And the best part is that last step where you hit it with that Total Boat Wood Honey, which, by the way, is food safe and makes a great cutting board finish.
This one kicked my butt, but I absolutely love this piece. And honestly, I'm so excited for one of my viewers to own it. Build difficulty, I give it at least a 7.5 out of 10. For illusion impact, I'm gonna go with a 4 out of 10. Now, it doesn't jump out into 3D space for me like the Mosaic did, but it still works as a really interesting geometric pattern illusion. And now it's time for the final boss illusion, a kinetic sculpture that seems impossible.
So to catch you back up, I've made the rings, fixed my mistake on those rings, rounded them over, then cut the frame parts in the CNC, and then fixed my mistake on the frame part. And now it's time to glue in all the dowels. This was tricky because the holes that I cut in the CNC were just a little bit oversized for those dowels, and the dowels were hard to keep straight as I glued them in. Remember that because it's going to be important later on. And now that I've got Jeff back working in the shop full time, we can divide and conquer a lot more on these projects, which is just super helpful. So while I'm working on all these parts, Jeff is working on the cam, 21 of them to be exact, and these all get staggered by 30 degrees, and that's what gives the rings that ripple motion as you turn the hand crate. And as I take that stretcher that I had to repair out of the clamps, I'm happy to report that I finally replaced that Rockler workbench that I destroyed with a new Rockler workbench. These are my favorite woodworking benches, and I'm gonna keep this one looking as good as I can as long as I can. But I'm guessing it's sort of like when you get a new vehicle and you swear you're never gonna eat in it and you're gonna take it through the car wash once a week, and I think we all know how that ends up turning out. But regardless, I won't do any more epoxy pours on top of this thing, so hopefully we'll be good. Each cam contacts a little wooden foot at the end of the dowel rod, and then the other end of the dowel rod connects to the rings, and that's how this whole contraption operates. And Jeff is working on making the wooden feet, which we went with Purple Heart because the only thing better than walnut is walnut mixed with Purple Heart. And while he's doing that, I'm gluing the frame that holds all these parts together. Now, so far, I've done exactly 2 things in this build: make the rings and make the stretchers. And so far, I've made 2 mistakes on this build that I've had to address after each one. So as I put this frame together, I'm actually feeling pretty good. I mean, you want to get all those mistakes out of the way early in the build, and those mistakes kind of help you get focused so you don't make any more dumb mistakes later on. Mistakes like smacking a stretcher with a mallet when that stretcher is an ingrained glue up that you haven't bothered to reinforce.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Again, I'm glad I got those early mistakes out of the way, so it's all going to be smooth sailing on this build from here on out. The rings of the sculpture represent the ripples of water when a drop hits the surface, and this little Purple Heart puck is going to be my water drop in the center. And I tried pretty much everything I could think of to turn this into a little sphere, but Purple Heart is stubborn, so I broke out the disc sander, which made quick work of the shaping, and after that it's a few hours of hand sanding to actually get the ball nice and smooth. Real quick, I'm going to reglue that top stretcher back in place, but this time I'll make sure to reinforce it, and I'm adding strength by drilling holes for some through dowels. And this little poor 3/8 inch Forstner bit was super dull and ready to be thrown away, but I had to make these last 4 holes, and I just kind of prayed that I didn't start a fire, but thankfully walnut smells really nice when you burn it. After gluing in some 3/8 inch dowels, I should be good to go if I ever decide to smack it with a mallet again. And I thought I was really close to wrapping up this project now that that frame is all glued up and almost all those parts have been made. And before I do that test assembly, we went ahead and sanded and finished this part since we definitely won't have to do any more modifications to it later on. So far, all those rings seem to be fitting where all those dowels insert into the frame, but since I had to plug all those holes in the rings earlier, the dowels weren't sitting flush, so Jeff here is taking care of that. And I'm getting really excited because it's almost assembly time and I am super anxious to see this thing in motion for the first time. I added the feet and then just used some CA glue to hold them in place. And next I started to install the cams on the 3/8" dowel rod that will rotate to turn all those cams. And pretty quickly I noticed that this seemed pretty heavy. All those cams are made from solid oak and they were causing that dowel rod to sag. But then I realized that was the least of my issues.
Have you ever had that thing where you just know that something isn't gonna work out, but you just kind of like keep going, hoping and praying that by some miracle, it's all gonna be fine? When I installed them, I noticed that they were kind of wonky and warped because they are so thin, but I just hoped the assembly itself would kind of keep them straight. It's not doing that, and it means this thing doesn't work, which leaves me with only one solution, and that is to cut off these dowels from all these rings and then re-drill everything, which is not gonna be as easy as it sounds.
As I snip off all those dowels, let me explain what I mean a little bit better here. So the issue with those 1/4" dowels is that they're too thin and they're prone to warping, so I need to upgrade to a thicker 3/8" dowel. But the problem is trying to line that hole back up and then cut those new holes accurately so everything fits into the automata correctly. So what I did was just cut a set of templates out of my CNC and then glue those temporarily to the ring. This aligns those holes, I mean, not perfectly, but it's gonna get me pretty close where I can re-drill them. And this time around, when I put in those thicker dowels, I made a 3D printed set of alignment collars to hold the dowel in place while the CA glue that I'm using dries. And I was able to keep them mostly straight this time around. Now, what I should have done was cut those new holes slightly undersized so that the dowels friction fit into the holes, and I could have skipped gluing them in altogether.
So I worked late last night trying to get this project over the finish line, and I just finally had to come to the realization that as it currently stands, this piece is not working out. And I finally came up with a solution. So I wanted to explain quickly what's going wrong and what my plan to fix it is.
So like I said earlier, those cams are too heavy and I really didn't know what to do about it at first. And I didn't want to waste them, but I also knew that the cams being too heavy was only half the problem. The other issue was the 3/8" dowel rod that I was using was too thin. So I decided to switch to cutting the cams and a new set of feet from a pine board that's going to be much lighter. I also cut in square holes for a 1/2" square dowel, and that should be a lot stronger. Now the problem is I'm literally trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. So my solution? 3D printing. I drilled out a 1" hole and then made a collar with an outside diameter of 1" and then an inside square hole that was a 1/2 inch. And those collars are slightly undersized, so after they're glued together in the hole, they can spin freely. Something else I did to save time was I cut all the square holes in the cams to the proper 30-degree offset so that each cam rests at that exact right angle, and I don't have to try to align these later on by sight. And while I was 3D printing all these parts, I figured I might as well 3D print a quick handle that I can just snap together, but I promise I will make a better version of this for whomever wins this sculpture. And since I switched up all those parts for pine, I figured I should also go ahead and make the Waterdrop out of pine. And this time I was able to chuck it up in my drill and sand it into shape like it's a mini lathe because, you know, pine is so much softer than that purple heart. And after making a ton of little mistakes, will all those dowels, the rings, the cams, the little feet line up so I can turn this thing and create that water ripple illusion? Let's find out.
I don't think I've ever been this blown away by one of my own builds. Now, build difficulty, definitely a full 10 out of 10, and for illusion impact, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. But I wanna know what you guys think. If you watch to the end, comment down below with your favorite illusion, and here's how you can win one of these. Click that link in the description and fill out the form on my website, and in 2 weeks, I'll pick 5 winners. Good luck, and make sure you get subscribed to see more of these crazy builds. Thanks for watching, and here's a couple more videos I think you'll enjoy.